Could you give us your ideas about your methods of command and the size and composition of your tactical headquarters?
Well, I had three types of tactical headquarters available to me. One was on a tank basis, the other on a wheel basis, and the other also on a wheel basis, but I think it would be more correct to describe it as a jeep basis. I always felt if it was possible, I wanted to be near the battle, if not actually in it, because by that means one can see what is going on and get the feel of the whole thing. Now, in the tactical headquarters, if it was going to be a real tank battle like Operation Goodwood was likely to be and was, then I set out with the full tank headquarters, which consisted of one tank in which myself and my G2 were in. It had two wireless sets in it, and then there was the reserve one, which my ADC was in. Then there was the CRA, who had with him either his BMRA or his staff captain RA. And then there was a protective troop of 3 tanks. That was the full tank tactical headquarters. The idea was that the ADC would do the navigating in front. He didn't always do it, but that was the general idea. And it was very important to have the CRA close with me all the time, so that if there was to be any divisional arrangements of artillery, they could be dealt with by word of mouth, by talking together. But I do want to stress that the amount one uses as tactical headquarters depends enormously on the tactical situation, of course. But at the beginning of the war, we found that frontages held by divisions were far greater than those at the end of the war. At the beginning of the war, it was impossible, really, for the divisional commander to spend the whole of his day in a tactical headquarters, because he would have done far better to stay by his wireless set, where he gets a lot of information, and make short, quick visits to his various commanders. In the later stages, from the middle of the war onwards, it was possible, nearly always, to get into the battle and get the feel of it. Now, Hans, is that the sort of way you ran your tactical headquarters, as I described?
So we did, and since the beginning, when Goodwood formed up our armor, we were trained that the division commander and the regimental commander had to be on the armor battle with the tactical headquarter in front, very close to the front, and only on the defense battle to be behind. And you remember very well from the desert that Rommel even overdid with this tactical headquarter, and he sometimes were lost. But anyway, I think in the armor battle, that is the way we should have done it, with the tactical headquarter.
Yeah. Did you, as a matter of interest, make any difference in the way you worked these things in the enormous distances of Russia? Did you work the same sort of way there as you did in the closer country of Normandy?
In Russia, normally we remained with our headquarter, the division commander, unless there were special situations where the division commander were wanted, then he took his tactical headquarter. But with these great distances and the great masses of Russian tanks and armor, normally we had to lead from behind and push forward.
Gentlemen, we've questioned the 2 principal opponents in Operation Goodwood. You were relatively junior commanders at that time, but your youth then and your subsequent careers may have given you a slightly different view of the battle. Brigadier Stileman, General Roberts has mentioned the training of the 11th Armoured Division before the invasion. What do you remember of that training?
Well, I remember it vividly. I arrived in the 8th Battalion Rifle Brigade when they were stationed at the Hunmanby Girls' School on part of the Yorkshire Plains. And day after day, and indeed night after night, we had to concentrate at platoon and company level, getting the battle procedures absolutely right. that we would require for infantry tank cooperation. And the communications those days were nothing like as good, of course, as we have in a mechanized company these days, and a great deal of realization of what one had to do was dependent upon corporals looking towards the platoon commander by silent signal as much as anything. But on a higher plane, I learnt all that I knew about the larger scale of infantry tank cooperation under the instruction of Bill Close, who taught me literally everything I knew about that particular skill. And we did reach a very, very high level of proficiency before we crossed over to Normandy.
General von Rosen, could you give us an example of the standard of training in your unit?
You know, in the morning of 11 July, my company was Alert Company. 10 minutes after Alert, we moved from Moneyville through Giberville in the area of the Colombelle factory. As my first platoon was on the end of Giberville, British tanks in the area of Central Marine began to fire against us. And my first platoon stopped. It began the fire battle. I think it is now time to start the counterattack and give the order to attack. But none of my tanks was moving. I give the order a second time and a third time, but no tank was moving. And for the first time, I give the order now, company moving, and I added, in other case, I will turn my gun against you and fire against you. And at this moment, I have seen that my antennae was broken, and I hadn't radio contact with my company. What was to do? Also, I moved myself before my company and began with my tanks the counterattack, and I've seen the other tanks followed me. The first platoon followed me, and the second platoon in fire position, and so on. It was now an attack like an exercise on a training area. One platoon moved, the other fired. And 20 minutes later, we killed 12 Shermans, as you know, and we took intact 2 others.
General, you've mentioned that the Tiger battalions were very special units. Was morale in these units very high?
Oh, indeed, it was very high. You know, during 2 years' battle in Russia, we had always a feeling to be superior as a Russian. And sometimes we had 200 or more tanks, Russian tanks, against us, and we was always superior. So the morale and the feeling, our feeling to be superior, was very, very high. It was the same case on Normandy front until Goodwood. Goodwood was the first time that we had the feeling not to be successful, and we had the feeling to have failed on this day. But it was only done by the air superiority.
So, Richard, your morale was rather based on the strength of your weapons, because that was the first time that you'd felt that you'd been overpowered by something stronger than the equipment that you had.
Yes.
Well, the morale that we experienced in G Company was, I think, rather based on persons rather than equipment, because the 75mm Sherman wasn't anything that we could put our confidence in to the extent of your equipment. But the affection which we had for all the people with whom we worked in 3rd Royal Tanks, for instance, and the other 2 armoured regiments, not to mention our own family of G Company and 8th Rifle Brigade as a battalion, was something very special. And last night we attended a dinner, the G Company Association dinner, and we meet on the last Friday in every November in some East End restaurant near Liverpool Street Station. And 65 of us sat down to dinner last night, which I think is rather remarkable, and is an outward and visible sign of this personal type of morale which has lasted from that day until this.
If I can add something, you know, we had always a feeling that enemy tanks had no chance against us. And the second thing, the battalion was often split. and the different companies under command of German divisions. And if we came under command of a division, this division was, all soldiers of this division was very happy to have Tiger tanks, because if Tiger tanks was there, it was a feeling that the enemy tanks hadn't chance against us.
Brigadier, you mentioned the lack of riflemen in a motor company because of specialists such as drivers and wireless operators and such like.
Well, we certainly felt a lack of riflemen with their personal weapons in their hand throughout the whole of the Operation Goodwood. On our approach up to the Borgobus Ridge and east of the railway embankment in the area of Le Mesnil-Fremantle, these large numbers of Germans that were surrendering after the heavy bombardment from the foxholes and the cornfield, we never had enough chaps to cater for this commitment. But we managed to send them back as best as we could. And again, on the actual clearing of the villages of Bra by F&H Company and ourselves, G Company, on Hubert Folly, we could have always done with many, many more riflemen on the ground. And this seems to have prevailed throughout today. I mean, as Commandant of the Officers' Wing at School of Infantry, on all the exercises that we did and arranged, the officer students were saying, but if only we had more men on the ground with their personal weapons, we could have taken such and such a wood, or we could have done more patrolling. And I'm sure those who command mechanized companies today find exactly the same thing. What do you feel about it, Richard?
I think the same thing in our army, too. As I was commander of the 21st Panzer Brigade in Augersdorf, in all my exercise which I started, it was always a great lack of infantrymen.
A final question. General, you were convinced that your Tiger Battalion was sighted too far forward. How would you have liked to have seen it employed?
During Goodwood, I was young lieutenant, and I can give today only my own opinion. A Tiger Battalion must be employed as operational reserve and not as local reserve. Operational reserve must be concentrated not too near the front line. I think in the case of Goodwood, the region behind the Borgobus ridges would be much better. From this we could wait until the point of the main effort is exactly to seen, and from this concentration area we could start a counterattack or to be available for each other task.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. To summarize Operation Goodwood in terms of winning or losing is to miss the point. The fact is that a small, well-trained anti-tank force sighted in great depth inflicted heavy casualties on a massed armored attack. On the other hand, that defense was forced to yield valuable ground, and reserves were committed which were to leave it unbalanced when the next attack came. There are many things that we can learn from a study of Operation Goodwood, but two facts seem to stand out which may be easy to overlook in peacetime. First, the effect of chance on events, and second, the disproportionate way in which the action of an individual can alter the course of a battle.